The night the city dressed itself in lights and promises, no one noticed the man standing alone outside the restaurant, until they did. Snow drifted down in soft, careless flakes, and inside the glass walls, laughter rose with a clink of champagne glasses. It was New Year's Eve, the kind of night when tables were reserved weeks in advance and hope felt expensive. The man adjusted the collar of his coat, checked his phone once more, and slipped it back into his pocket. He was a billionaire CEO, a name that moved markets and closed deals with a handshake. But right now he was just another customer being told, "We're fully booked." Inside, the maitre d' gave him a polite smile that didn't reach his eyes. No table. No exceptions. The irony stung more than the cold. All that success, all that power, and still nowhere to sit when the year turned. He stepped aside, watching couples and families pass him, their faces glowing with excitement. For the first time in a long while, the loneliness he kept buried under meetings and money rose to the surface. He hadn't come here to impress anyone. He'd come because he didn't want to be alone when the clock struck midnight. Across the room, near the back, a black single dad sat with his young daughter, her legs swinging under the table as she played with a paper crown. Their table was small, nothing fancy, but their laughter filled the space around them. The father looked tired in a way that spoke of long days and longer nights, but there was warmth in his eyes. He had worked extra shifts, skipped comforts, all to give his child this one special night. New Year's Eve wasn't about status for him. It was about memories. The billionaire noticed them without meaning to. Maybe it was the way the little girl kept glancing at the decorations, or how her father leaned in to listen to every word she said, as if nothing else in the world mattered. Something about it tugged at him. He looked away quickly, embarrassed by the ache in his chest. He told himself he didn't need this. He never needed anything. Minutes passed. The countdown screens flickered to life. The restaurant buzzed louder. The staff hurried. And still, the billionaire stood there, invisible in a room full of people who would recognize his name if they heard it. He was about to turn and leave, to spend another milestone night alone in a quiet penthouse, when a chair scraped softly against the floor. The single dad stood up. For a moment no one understood why. Then he looked across the room, met the billionaire's eyes, and raised his hand in a small, steady wave. The kind that wasn't loud or proud, but certain. Conversations slowed. Heads turned. The maitre d' hesitated. The billionaire felt his heart pound, unsure whether to be grateful or suspicious. And as the clock edged closer to midnight, one question hung in the air. Was this wave about to change everything, or was it about to reveal a truth neither man was ready to face? The billionaire hesitated. His first instinct telling him this had to be some kind of mistake. People didn't wave him over like that. They asked, they begged, they pitched ideas. But the single dad didn't say a word. He just kept his hand raised, calm and steady, as if inviting an old friend instead of a stranger. The little girl noticed too. She looked up at her father, then over at the man by the door, her eyes wide with curiosity. Around them, the restaurant seemed to hold its breath. The maitre d' glanced between the standing man and the billionaire, clearly unsure whether to intervene. Rules mattered here. Reservations mattered. Reputation mattered. But something about the moment made it hard to interrupt. The billionaire took a slow step forward, then stopped again. He wasn't used to being unsure. Boardrooms didn't feel like this. Neither did private jets or luxury hotels. As he walked closer, he noticed the details he usually missed in people. The single dad's jacket was worn at the cuffs, carefully cleaned but clearly old. His hands showed signs of hard work, fingers rough, nails trimmed short. This was someone who didn't live behind glass walls or assistants. This was someone who carried his life with him, openly, without apology. The billionaire felt strangely exposed in comparison. The man lowered his hand but stayed standing, giving the billionaire space to choose. "It's New Year's Eve," he said quietly, his voice steady but not demanding. No one should start a new year feeling invisible. The words weren't dramatic. They weren't rehearsed. that almost made them heavier. The billionaire nodded once, not trusting himself to speak. He glanced at the little girl again. She smiled at him, a quick, shy smile, then went back to adjusting her paper crown. He wondered when someone had last smiled at him without wanting something in return. Probably longer than he wanted to admit. As he reached the table, the noise of the restaurant slowly returned, but it felt distant now, like it belonged to another room. The maitre d' cleared his throat softly, clearly uncomfortable, but said nothing yet. The billionaire noticed other diners watching, some curious, some confused, some quietly judgmental. He had been on magazine covers, in headlines, but this attention felt different. This wasn't admiration. It was uncertainty. The single dad pulled out a chair but didn't sit back down himself. "If they say no, that's okay," he added, lowering his voice. "I just thought I should ask." There was no bitterness in his tone, just honesty. The billionaire realized that scared him more than arrogance ever could. Outside, fireworks popped faintly in the distance, reminders that time was moving forward whether they were ready or not. The countdown screens shifted numbers. 10 minutes to midnight. 10 minutes before another year passed without warning. The maitre d' finally stepped closer, his expression tight, and opened his mouth to speak. The billionaire felt a familiar urge to step in, to use his name, his power to control the situation. But he didn't. For once he waited. And in that waiting, with the clock ticking and eyes watching, he began to sense that this invitation wasn't just about a table. It was about a choice that might follow him long after the new year began. The maitre d' hesitated just long enough for the moment to stretch thin. His eyes flicked to the reservation screen, then to the dining room, then back to the two men standing beside the table. "Sir," he said carefully, choosing his words the way people did when they sensed money nearby, "this table is reserved for two." The statement hung in the air, polite but firm, like a door being closed softly. The single dad nodded at once. "I understand," he said, already reaching for his chair as if preparing to sit back down. There was no argument, no raised voice. He had taken his chance and accepted the outcome before it was even final. That quiet acceptance stirred something in the billionaire. It reminded him of how rarely people backed down around him without resentment. Before the chair could scrape the floor, the little girl spoke up. "Daddy," she whispered, not quite quietly enough. "It's okay. We can share." Her voice was small, but it cut through the tension like a bell. A few nearby diners smiled despite themselves. The maitre d' stiffened, clearly aware of how delicate the situation had become. The billionaire felt his throat tighten. He had closed billion-dollar deals without a tremor, but this felt heavier. He wondered what it meant that a child saw space where adults only saw rules. He wondered what it said about him that he had spent years buying comfort but never learning how to ask for it. From the corner of the room, a woman at another table watched quietly, her phone resting face down in her hand. She recognized the billionaire instantly. Everyone in her industry did. She also noticed the single dad's tired eyes, the way he leaned slightly toward his daughter, protective without thinking. The contrast fascinated her. Power on one side, responsibility on the other, both standing in the same fragile moment. The manager appeared, drawn by the pause in service and the shifting attention. He offered a practiced smile, the kind designed to smooth things over before they turned messy. "Is there a problem?" he asked, though he already knew there was. The restaurant thrived on image. New Year's Eve was not the night for uncertainty. The billionaire finally spoke, his voice low. "I don't want to cause trouble." It was the truth, and saying it surprised him. He had caused trouble his whole life without meaning to. The manager nodded, relieved, but the single dad shook his head gently. "This isn't trouble," he said. "It's just a moment." Outside, fireworks grew louder, echoing between buildings. Phones buzzed with messages, reminders, countdown alerts. Time pressed in from all sides. The manager glanced at his watch. Decisions had to be made quickly now. The little girl reached for her father's hand, squeezing it. He squeezed back, steady and reassuring, even as his eyes stayed on the billionaire. There was no challenge there, only an unspoken question. Not about money, not about status, about what kind of man he chose to be when no one was forcing his hand. As the final minutes of the year slipped away, the restaurant stood on edge, caught between policy and possibility, while the answer, whatever it would be, waited just out of reach. The manager shifted his weight, feeling the eyes of the room on him now. This was no longer just about a table on New Year's Eve. It was about optics, about fairness, about whether a luxury restaurant could bend without breaking. He glanced at the maitre d', then at the reservation list again, as if the answer might suddenly appear there. Outside, another burst of fireworks rattled the windows, bright flashes reflecting across polished glass and silverware. The billionaire felt the familiar urge to take control rising in his chest. A single phone call could clear this up. A quiet word about who he was would end the uncertainty. But the longer he stood there, the more he sensed that using his name would cheapen the moment. This wasn't a boardroom standoff. This was something raw, something human, unfolding in front of strangers and a child who was watching closely. At nearby tables, whispers started to spread. Some people recognized him now, leaning toward each other, curiosity turning into judgment. Others focused on the single dad, guessing his story, wondering why he would risk embarrassment on a night like this. The tension thickened, stretching with every second that passed. No one sat. No one laughed. Even the music seemed to fade into the background. The little girl leaned closer to her father and whispered something that made him smile sadly. He brushed a strand of hair from her face, a small gesture that spoke of years of showing up, even when it was hard. The billionaire noticed it all. He thought about his own childhood, remembered empty dinners, remembered assistants filling spaces where family should have been. The memory hit harder than he expected. The manager cleared his throat. "We have policies," he said carefully, as if the word itself could shield him. "Tonight is extremely busy." His eyes flicked to the child, then away again. The room waited. 10:09. Someone's phone quietly started the countdown, quickly silenced, but the numbers lingered in everyone's mind. The billionaire took a step back, then forward again, torn between walking away and standing his ground. He realized this wasn't just about being lonely on New Year's Eve. It was about whether he would keep hiding behind comfort, or step into something unpredictable. The single dad met his gaze, not pleading, not proud, just present. A server approached the manager and whispered something urgent. The manager's expression changed slightly, his confidence faltering. He looked toward the entrance, then back at the table. Whatever the server had said added another layer of pressure, another ticking clock inside the ticking clock of the year ending. The noise outside swelled, fireworks exploding closer now, lighting up faces frozen in anticipation. Glasses were raised midair, forgotten. Everyone felt it, that sense that something was about to tip, one way or another. As the final seconds of the year closed in, the manager opened his mouth to speak again, and both men waited, knowing that whatever came next would echo far beyond this restaurant, far beyond this night, into a year none of them yet understood. The manager's phone vibrated in his pocket just as he was about to speak. The timing felt almost unreal. He glanced down, frowned, then stepped a few paces away to answer. His voice low but tense. The room leaned in without meaning to. Whatever that call was, it mattered. When he returned, his polished calm had cracked, replaced by something closer to worry. "There's been a cancellation," he said slowly, eyes scanning the room instead of settling on either man. A ripple of quiet reaction passed through the diners. Relief flickered across the maitre d's face, but the manager raised a hand, stopping him. "But the table isn't here," he added. "It's our private balcony. It's not usually offered on New Year's Eve." The word private landed heavily. The billionaire recognized it instantly. That balcony was reserved for high-profile guests, discreet meetings, people who paid not just for food but for silence. A few heads turned toward him now, recognition solidifying into certainty. Whispers grew sharper. The room was guessing what would happen next. The single dad stiffened slightly, sensing the shift. He glanced down at his daughter, who was watching the manager with wide eyes, unaware of the invisible lines being drawn. "That sounds expensive," he said quietly, already pulling back. The unspoken message was clear. This wasn't meant for people like him. The billionaire felt the moment tilt. The easy option was right there. The balcony, the privacy, the escape from judgment. He could spend New Year's Eve alone but untouched, just like always. No eyes, no questions, no risk. The manager looked at him expectantly, almost hopeful, as if the decision were already made. Before he could answer, the little girl spoke again, her voice soft but curious. "Is it outside?" she asked. "Can you see the fireworks from there?" The question wasn't meant to challenge anyone, but it did. The manager hesitated, caught off guard. "Yes," he said. "It has the best view in the building." Her face lit up. "Daddy, that would be amazing," she said, then quickly added. "For him too." She nodded toward the billionaire as if including him was the most natural thing in the world. A few diners shifted uncomfortably. The rules they lived by didn't account for a child's logic. The billionaire felt every eye return to him. This wasn't just about a table anymore. It was about choosing between comfort and consequence. If he took the balcony alone, the night would end quietly, but the story would end here. If he didn't, he risked public scrutiny, misunderstanding, and something he couldn't buy his way out of. Outside, the countdown reached its final breaths. Fireworks thundered, shaking the windows as midnight closed in. The manager waited, the single dad held his daughter's hand, and the billionaire stood between two paths, knowing that whatever he said next would set the tone not just for the new year, but for who he would be when the noise finally faded. The billionaire finally spoke just as the first shout of 10 echoed from somewhere in the room. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "If there's a table with a view," he said, looking at the manager, "it shouldn't be private tonight." The manager blinked, unsure he'd heard correctly. The billionaire turned to the single dad. "If you're willing," he added, "I'd like to share it." The room went still. The single dad searched his face, not for wealth or power, but for intent. "You don't have to," he said carefully. "We're fine right here." The little girl looked between them, sensing the weight of the moment without fully understanding it. The countdown continued, 9-8, and the pressure mounted. "I know I don't have to," the billionaire replied. "That's kind of the point." For the first time that night he smiled, and it wasn't the practiced kind people saw in interviews. It was uncertain, almost nervous. The single dad nodded once, a silent agreement that felt bigger than words. The manager exhaled slowly, then motioned toward the stairs. "This way," he said, surrendering to the moment. As they moved, whispers followed them, phones discreetly lowered, eyes tracking every step. The balcony door opened to cold air and a wide, open view of the city, lights stretching endlessly below. Fireworks exploded in color, close enough to feel, loud enough to drown out everything else. They reached the table just as the countdown hit 3. The little girl climbed into her chair, bundled up, her face glowing with excitement. The billionaire pulled out a chair, then paused, watching the father help his daughter first. When midnight arrived in a rush of sound and light, cheers rising from every direction at once. For a brief moment, none of them spoke. The billionaire felt something loosen inside him, something he hadn't realized was knotted so tight. He wasn't alone. Not really. Not tonight. The single dad raised his glass of sparkling water, smiling softly. "Happy New Year," he said. The billionaire echoed it, the words feeling new on his tongue. As the noise settled, the manager returned, his tone respectful now. "Your first round is on the house," he said, then hesitated. "And thank you." He meant it more than he knew. The tension that had gripped the restaurant had broken, replaced by something warmer, something people would talk about long after the night ended. But as they sat, the billionaire's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, his expression shifting. The single dad noticed. "Everything okay?" he asked. The billionaire hesitated, then turned the phone so he could see. It was a news alert already spreading. Photos, headlines, speculation. A powerful CEO spotted sharing a New Year's Eve table with a black single father and his child. The internet was already choosing sides, already shaping the story. The billionaire locked his phone and set it aside. "It will be," he said, though he knew the coming days wouldn't be simple. The single dad nodded, understanding more than was said. Outside, another wave of fireworks lit the sky. Just then, the little girl leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was sharing a secret. "Mister," she said to the billionaire, "my dad says people show who they are at the start of the year." She smiled. "I think you did." The billionaire swallowed, looking out over the city as the words sank in. He had come searching for a table, for a place to sit through midnight. What he found instead was a choice that would follow him long after the fireworks faded, and a story the world hadn't finished telling yet. The noise of the fireworks slowly softened into distant echoes, and the city settled into the first quiet minutes of the new year. On the balcony, the cold no longer felt sharp, felt clean like a reset. The little girl sipped her drink carefully, her paper crown slipping sideways as she laughed at something her father whispered to her. The billionaire watched them, realizing how rare it was to sit without checking the time, without thinking about the next move. Inside the restaurant, life returned to normal. Music swelled again. Glasses clinked. But something had shifted. Servers moved with lighter steps, and a few guests glanced up at the balcony with small, thoughtful smiles. The moment had passed, but its presence lingered. Not as drama but as meaning. The single dad finally relaxed back into his chair. "I didn't plan any of that," he said quietly, almost apologetic. "I just didn't want her to remember this night as another closed door." The billionaire nodded, understanding more than the words said. "I've spent years walking through open doors," he replied. "I never asked who was left standing outside." They talked then not about money or business but about ordinary things. School projects, long workdays, missed birthdays. The billionaire spoke about building a company from nothing, about the cost of always chasing the next success. The father shared stories of balancing 2 jobs, of learning how to braid hair by watching videos late at night. Different lives, different struggles, but the same quiet weight underneath. When the bill came, the billionaire reached for it out of habit, then paused. The single dad noticed and gently pushed it back. "Tonight was shared," he said. "Let it stay that way." The billionaire smiled, surprised by how much that mattered to him. They split it without ceremony, without comment. Down below, a few people had already recognized them from the balcony. Photos were spreading, opinions forming, headlines being drafted. But up there the noise felt far away. For once, the billionaire didn't reach for his phone. He let the story belong to the moment instead of the internet. As the night drew to a close, the little girl stood and held out her hand to the billionaire. "Thank you for sitting with us," she said, serious in the way only children can be. He shook her hand gently, then surprised himself by kneeling to her level. "Thank you for waving," he replied. "I almost walked away." They parted at the door, no promises made, no numbers exchanged. Just a quiet understanding. Outside, the city looked different now, softer, less hurried. The billionaire watched the father and daughter disappear into the crowd, their hands linked, their laughter fading into the night. Later, alone in his car, the billionaire glanced at the headlines again. Some praised him. Some questioned his motives. He closed the app and stared out at the passing lights. For the first time, the opinions didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling he carried with him, the reminder that being seen wasn't the same as being known, and that connection couldn't be reserved or bought. New Year's Eve would come again, and the world would keep turning. But one wave from a black single dad had changed the direction of his night, and maybe something deeper too. And as the city welcomed the year ahead, the billionaire understood that sometimes, the most powerful seat at the table is the one you choose to share.